This is Paul Johnson with New Frontiers. Now, today our panel is going to have a robust discussion about what you might have seen on the front page of the New York Times, if you read such a magazine, last Friday that really begged the question, is the Democratic Party collapsing? Now, what we see is that the Democratic Party has done a tremendous amount of damage to its brand. And if you look at the polling as well as the registration numbers, it's almost overwhelming how much trouble the Democratic Party is in. And of course, that begs the question, is a third party not only viable, but maybe more importantly, is it essential? There's never been a time where we've needed a real alternative to the status quo than today. And the Democratic Party just doesn't seem to be capable of fulfilling it. Now, I'm just an ordinary optimistic American who still believes that the United States is a great cause for good. And I wrote a book about that that's called What's Right with America. What you're going to find today in today's show is us talking about the importance of making certain that we have viable opposition if our democracy is going to be successful. Now, if you like the work that we're doing, push that subscribe button. Let's get this very interesting show going.
Destiny. Destiny. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. 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 You and I have a rendezvous with destiny.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
All right, so I'd like to welcome back two of my three guests. First, we have Henry, who is here, a professor at ASU. Henry, welcome. How you doing today?
Great to see you both. Welcome back, Bob. It's been a couple of weeks.
All right, so how are those kids doing? Still riding that bike around ASU?
Still riding the bike around, Paul, and as crazy as you might think I am, Bob here plays golf in the middle of the day, in the middle of the summer. So I'm not even the craziest person on the podcast anymore. You can't call me that.
Okay, now, Bob, do you play golf in Phoenix at this weather, or are you up in Munns Park?
I'm currently in Munns Park. I used to until this year, when I would come down the hill for some reason, rejoin my golf group, which continues to play throughout the summer. I've opted not to join them this year, so I have finally worked out.
I was out playing at the Biltmore during one of the hot days. It was a 122-degree day, but we didn't know it. We just kept kind of pretending to ourselves it wasn't that bad, it was okay. And finally, they shut down the whole damn golf course and said, nobody's allowed to be out here anymore. We came in. It was funny. Once we knew what the temperature was, I think we all thought we had a heat stroke. I mean, it just got dramatically worse. But in any event, so how you doing today, Bob?
I'm doing well, thank you.
What's the weather like up in Munns Park? Is it good today?
We finally, at the tail end of the monsoon season, is getting a little bit of monsoon activity. Probably it will just last this week, but it's welcome.
Now, Elliot can't be with us because he had the top down in that yellow Porsche that he told us about last week, and I think he got a little more burned on his forehead than he should have been, so he's having to go in and do a checkup on that. You got to be careful with that in Phoenix.
You might have to sell it. You might have to sell it to me at a reduced price now.
Yeah. What year was it? I forget. He told us. Was it a 76 or something like that?
Oh, it was a 2000. I remember it was a 2006 911 convertible.
Ah, there you go. Okay. All right. So today, what we're going to spend our time talking about, I don't know if either one of you read the New York Times article, but it was in last Friday's paper on the front page, which you can now get online. There was an article about the party registration and how much trouble the Democratic Party is actually in. There were a lot of facts and statistics that were laid out, and I'll just cover a couple of them. The first one was that the Democratic Party has reduced during the last 4 years. They went down by 2.1 million voters, while the Republican Party went up by 2.4 million. By the way, they didn't cover this, but if you do the math on it, you'll see that the independents went up, if you count unaffiliated and independents together, they went up to 3.6 million. So effectively, a big portion of the group that would have potentially registered as Democrats are registering as independents. But what that's done is it's put them at a disadvantage literally in every single swing state. In fact, this is the first time that people under the age of 45, more people registered as Republicans than independents. So I'll start with you on this, Henry. Henry, why don't you, if you have any thoughts on this, I'd love to just kind of hear how you see what's going on in this particular issue.
Yeah, the registration gap is interesting because it's been going on for a few years, as you say, and it was part of the discussion in Arizona here before the last presidential election that the Republicans had a better time getting new voters registered than the Democrats. And of course, we have to be careful because there's also this large group, and in some states like Arizona, there's just as many people who are unaffiliated or independents as there are Republicans or Democrats. And most of those people in the middle are actually relatively partisan, right? They almost always vote one way or the other. The actual segment of true independence is much smaller. But the Democratic Party has been struggling with this for a while, which is surprising when we consider the news cycle and a lot of media coverage of the Republican Party under Trump is portraying it being very, very radical. It really is kind of a jarring fact to learn that the Democrats are having a better time or a more difficult time registering voters than the Republicans. I think this is a part of a long-term trend. I think that Democrats are struggling with some of their core demographics, most importantly, low-income voters and to some extent minorities, especially Latinos. And that's a big problem for the party because the party back in the early 2000s had identified their low-income voting base, which had been the Democratic base for a very long time, as a sort of a social democratic party. They thought that low-income voters plus minorities were the coalition of the future and that would essentially last probably through the present day. But it just doesn't seem to be stacking up. And they're having a really intense intra-party debate about how to deal with that and how to try and recruit more voters and pivot away from some of the coalition that they thought that they were going to be able to rely on for a long time.
Yeah, you're right. They're having a big retreat week this week with many of the party higher-ups as well as consultants and others because it's to them it's a 5-alarm fire. Bob, what's your view of this? How do you see this from a basic standpoint, the change that's taken place in party registration? Is it something that the Democratic Party ought to be worried about? Is it something that you would have expected? How do you see it?
It certainly is something that the Democrats should be worried about, and I think that the Republicans also should be worried about. As you mentioned, the real surge is in independent registration. People opting out of the binary choice that our two-party system currently offers. And I do believe that there will be a contest for what the Democratic Party in today's climate stands for. I don't think any of these retreats matter or anything else anyone does right now matters. This will be resolved within the Democratic Party in the 2028 presidential primary. That's when we will have the decisions rendered by voters who participate in the Democratic primary in terms of what they want the Democratic Party to stand for. And until then, it's sort of an amorphous opposition group. Now, I think you can read way too much into this. The midterm election, like most midterm elections, is likely to be a referendum on the incumbent president. And all the polling indicates that the body politic is very dissatisfied with Trump's performance in office. And I think that makes it more likely than not that despite the poor shape that they're in and the questions of what they ultimately will stand for, Democrats are likely to have significant gains in 2026 midterms unless something significant changes between now and then.
So, Bob, let me ask you. Henry raised the question. There are some serious issues going on in the Republican Party today that I think are deeply concerning to many people. I mean, certainly this whole this whole revenge politics that seems to be taking place with them, getting rid of anybody in intelligence who disagreed with them, even to the point of getting rid of the latest intel officer who just simply told them in the Pentagon that they hadn't completely destroyed the bunker and that the ability to recover for Iran was high. Intelligence you would think you would want to know, but he ended up being on the wrong side of what Trump wanted him to be saying, and he's been removed. The intelligence officers underneath Tulsi Gabbard that have been removed because they had in any way, shape, or form had any fingerprints on what had happened to Trump before, regardless of the value that they may bring from an intelligence standpoint. Then we have John Bolton this week, who ended up finding that his home was being raided, which looks eerily suspicious because his book had been fairly negative. And then Chris Christie made a comment about it Sunday, and Trump gave rise to the issue today that maybe they're going to investigate him also on Bridgegate. You have all these things happening in the Republican Party, and yet the polling of the Democratic Party is lower than Trump. It's at about 33%. I don't even know how to make sense of that. Can you maybe help us frame that and try to gain a better understanding of it?
Well, I certainly believe that these issues should be far more salient than they are currently. Even though there are some on the Democratic side that say that you ought not to pursue those issues because so far they have not gotten much traction, I believe you need to continue to bring those to the attention of the body politic. And I hope at some point that in many other things you could have cited, begin to find some traction. And the concern and alarm that many of us feel about Trump's erosive effect on democratic norms and constitutional norms will be more broadly shared. But if you look issue by issue, the body politic is dissatisfied with the performance of the Trump administration, independent of that overall concern about his revenge politics, as you described it accurately. Trump was elected on two primary issues, inflation and immigration. Inflation remains disturbingly elevated, and Trump is trying to replay the Biden playbook of telling the American people that the economy is better than they perceive that it is. Well, sometimes it is, but that's never a winning political message. And I think his mismanagement of the economy, pushing additional inflationary measures, while layering it with historically very high tariffs, eroding the standard of living for the American consumer, as well as his thuggish approach to immigration enforcement, which the American people are rejecting, create the situation, which is often the case in American politics, that it's good enough just to be the other guy. And I think that is probably at this point the most accurate framing for the 2026 election, barring something changing from where we are. And given that Trump never yields, I don't expect him to abandon the policies that are putting him so deeply underwater in terms of public approval.
Henry, I hate to hit civics on this issue, but what we saw in the last campaign was that Kamala tried to put a big focus on democracy, and I certainly think that the democracy issues are very important. They're the issues that we're talking about here, but it seems to me that most people kind of get lost on the civics discussion. They tend to be more interested in the things that affect their daily lives. Bob made the point that Democrats shouldn't quit talking about these, but one of the things that I see as a challenge for the Democratic Party is I don't really know who they are. I don't know what it is that they really stand for. I'm pretty sure what they're against, but I can't really give you a good description of what they stand for. Your thoughts on that?
I think it's interesting the way that democracy became the central theme of the Biden administration. He gave this really prominent speech in Pennsylvania, railing against MAGA Republicans, portraying them as kind of neo-fascist movement that was dangerous to the American Republic. And then that was then adopted by Harris as one of the main themes of her campaign. And it just didn't work, but it didn't resonate with people. I think these sorts of issues and the sorts of things you were just talking about, people kind of getting purged within the intelligence apparatus, or leading members of the former Trump administration getting investigated and things, they actually turned out to be kind of elite level concerns, which I think must have surprised the Democratic Party, because they obviously thought, probably with good reason, based on polling and focus groups, they thought that things like democracy and the rule of law would resonate with voters, but they didn't. And I think that it would be a mistake for them to think that that is going to resonate further on. I think it's important to point all those things out, just as Rob said, because they matter and they should be part of the public record, and elites that are very informed and follow these things in detail should be mobilized, and they should know about these things. But I think it would be a mistake to think that that narrative is going to win over average voters, right, in swing districts. I think they probably remain very focused on the cost of living, on unemployment, and to a certain extent, probably immigration, although probably less so now that Trump is in office. And it looks like the economy is probably going to be somewhat mixed next year, if one had to be reckless enough to make a bet, right? Employment remains relatively strong in the United States, but inflation remains stubbornly high. And there are certain things like, for example, people not being able to sell their homes and to be able to move that are, I think, frustrating a lot of people, along with the high cost of living. So I think that picture, unless something really big changes, I think that picture is going to be similar next year. And that's going to make the midterms probably a disappointment for the Republicans, because a lot of the things that they promised to fix just won't have been fixed.
Yeah, I think clearly Trump has made some significant missteps on the economy that are challenging to him. I think the problem the Democrats are going to have is trying to explain what their economic message is. In fact, I think their economic message may be one of the most dangerous things that they can talk about. But before we get to the economy, let's kind of finish up on what I see as other challenges. One of the groups that's coming to this big conference that they're planning on having is called the Third Way. And the Third Way is, there's a new memo that came out by them. I don't know if it was supposed to be public or not, but it talks to them about I think it's 46 terms that they say Democrats shouldn't be talking about, that ranges from allyship, which is kind of the new word about trying to defend people who maybe are part of an ethnic minority or based upon their sexual orientation, but other words as well that they've listed as being highly problematic. And their view is that these words are turning off the American public. These words that kind of revolve around whatever it is that we define as being wokeness. To me, that is a big challenge for them. They have this element of the Democratic Party that tends to want to be supportive of minorities, that tends to want to be supportive of the underprivileged, but oftentimes I think that's being seen as an affront to everyone else, a challenge to other people, as opposed to being something that is in everyone's best interest.
I think the woke issue has badly hurt Democrats, and it's one of the explanations for the decline in party registration that we started talking about at the top of the show. However, identity politics is baked into the Democratic Party. It's something that has been an article of faith for the Democratic Party going back to the 1970s. And it's formalized. There's quotas in terms of who gets to go to the Democratic National Convention. And undoing that is going to be a stressful matter. And I think this is one of the things that will be subject of debate in 2028. You will have some candidates who want to double down on wokeism and identity politics. And you have Emmanuel, who is trying to position himself as the anti-woke and Democratic candidate. So this is, I think you're right, Paul. This will not be an easy thing for Democrats to get beyond if they choose to try to get beyond it.
Yeah, what I find to be fascinating about that is, I mean, I think it is a mistake to believe that Donald Trump is an incredibly popular president or even was a popular candidate. I think the reality is the public just thought that the Democratic Party was worse, or at least the majority of the public thought the Democratic Party was worse. And that's something that should worry them. But let's talk about a couple of the candidates, Bob, just for a moment. I don't know if you've been following Gavin Newsom, but he's been doing this whole wokeism, or excuse me, this whole mega shtick where he's putting up, where he talks and sounds like Donald Trump. And I think Republicans are interpreting that as meaning that he's trying to adopt his style. I don't think that's what he's trying to do at all. I think what he's trying to do is he's doing a parody. He's trying to make fun of him for the things that he's doing. But I heard that they sold like $1 million worth of merchandise the other day that was kind of this goofy stuff that that says, I don't know, like Gavin was right from the beginning or something, but just ridiculous things on that side. I like what Emmanuel has been doing. I think one of my favorite lines by Emmanuel is talking about, we need to start talking more about the classrooms and less about the bathrooms. I think that kind of summarizes in many respects how off base the Democratic Party has been on issues. But Gavin, by poking back Trump in the eye, seems to be showing to many Democrats, and I don't know yet, independents, we'll have to see what the polling shows, but it seems to be showing a strength. How do you look at that, Bob?
I don't know what to make of it. Whether to treat Trump as a very serious threat to a variety of democratic and constitutional norms, or to ridicule him as a clown. He's both. So I certainly think that there are reasons and grounds to use ridicule about some of his clownish characteristics and actions. So I wouldn't fault Newsom or others for doing so. I think that probably needs to be part of the narrative. But you can't overlook the seriousness of the threat that he presents. So that's a tough tightrope for politicians to walk with a public that only pays partial attention.
Yeah, it makes me want to pick up, like, this is the greatest podcast in the history of America. We're watched by more people than any other podcast ever. I'm told by many people how much they really love us, regardless of what the liberal elite are trying to tell you today.
Some people say it couldn't be done.
In any event.
Some people say it couldn't be done.
Yeah, I like it. You can just, all you have to do is say it, and it is. It seems to be where we're going. All right, Henry. So your thoughts on what we're seeing from the Democratic presidential candidates so far, especially Gavin Newsom. How do you see that?
Well, full disclosure, I don't follow Gavin Newsom very closely, or many politicians very closely right at the minute, I think, like most Americans. And so I think there's a bit of a vacuum, I would say, both in the Democratic Party in terms of authority and leadership, but also just in political news. I mean, the Trump administration is taking up all the oxygen. A lot of people would like to have more of a debate and to have more criticism of what they are doing from the other side. But I don't get the impression that there's really any sort of a organized line on how to oppose the Trump administration, or any figure that people are rallying around as the the standard bearer of the opposition in the Democratic Party. I think part of that is because Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and some of these other people in D.C. are obviously of a generation that's a little bit too old to do that. They're not going to lead this thing forward. So people are looking to Gavin Newsom as being one of the most prominent younger Democrats. And he, of course, wants to be part of the conversation, but I don't think he even knows what he would try and say to oppose Trump. So he's probably pulling stunts on social media to remain part of the conversation. That might be the only thing he can do at this point. The Democrats have to go away, and they're going to have to go to the midterms with a message, and they're going to ground test a lot of these different approaches in different parts of the country to see what resonates and what doesn't with their core constituencies, and especially with working class whites and working class Latinos. And then they're going to go away and look at all that data and look at all those results and come back in 2028 and do better. I think that we're in the real early days and kind of almost a political silly season at the moment. We shouldn't take it too seriously, the sorts of statements that are being made from anyone on the left.
All right, so I'm going to give you a little different point of view, and Henry, I'd like to have your thought on this, and here's why I see it a little differently. First, it may be an accident that every one of Trump's major positions are positions that are not that far from the Democratic Party, right? So when I say that, here's how I see it. Let's take a look at Israel, right? Israel, and I'm going to pick out Israel and Bosnia. Both of those two countries are kind of at the leading edge of Western liberal democracy, advocating or advancing the Western cause. But yet there's this group in the Democratic Party that is substantial, and it's substantial enough that candidates do not want to oppose them that are Democratic candidates. This group of people who believe that everything Western is bad, period. It's Western, it's bad. That's how they see it. Instead of seeing them as being a great cause for good, and this doesn't mean that Israel does everything right. Neither did Bosnia, which is a Muslim country. Neither has Ukraine, which we're dealing with in Russia. Neither has the United States. But when we do something wrong, our citizens can challenge us. When we do something wrong, the other groups of voices can speak up. But their view is that everything Western is bad. It's kind of this Orientalism that exists. Trump's position, it's actually almost on their position in this way. Not that he hasn't been supportive of Israel, but he has no problem with talking about why war is bad. We've heard him in the past talk about the United States isn't all that great when he was commenting once on Vladimir Putin. I watch him over and again, the things that he's doing on tariffs. We'll get to the economy in a moment. But that's a left issue. That's not a right issue, or it used to be anyway, a left issue. He's created an inability for the Democratic Party to step out and oppose him because they have interest groups on their side that don't want them to oppose it. And if they do, they begin to create a fracture within their own base. That seems to me to be true on a variety of issues. National security. If Democrats stepped out on the Israel issue, there's definitely a group within national security that would be more supportive. People in defense, people who believe in free market economies, people who believe in balanced budgets. But on none of those issues can they truly step out because their base wouldn't allow it.
My take on this is that Trump, across many different issue areas, has essentially scrambled the left-right divide that we used to have for a long time post-World War II. We sort of knew where Republicans stood on national security and where Democrats stood. We knew where they stood on the economy, on social issues, etc. Trump has taken a lot of issues like protectionism that Republicans hated from the left and used them. And you might even say the same thing on a sort of an isolationist, maybe even pacifist, slightly pacifist, maybe, I'm going out on a limb there, slightly pacifist stance that used to be a leftist thing. He's taken that. And I think that by scrambling that left-right divide, Trump has created an advantage for himself and the Republican Party. There is a first mover advantage to creating a new party and exploding this left-right divide. It's the ball is in the Democrats' court. Trump has said, I've taken a lot of your low-income voters for reasons ranging from immigration to protectionism to pacifism. Basically, Working class whites and Latinos have migrated to the Republicans. That's been difficult for the Democrats to deal with. But now the ball's in their court. The Democrats can choose how to respond. They're going to have to be smart. They're going to have to think about who are the voters that they can appeal to, in which ways, are there enough of them in the critical areas to win where they need to win? But the ball is in their court now. They have to respond to the reshaping of the Republican Party under Donald Trump.
Bob, I like the way Henry posed it, which is this first mover advantage, because I think clearly Trump has the first mover advantage. It's also not lost on me that candidates that have really won their primaries and that went on to win their generals, that were able to do both, actually challenged the existing status quo. I mean, Jimmy Carter, when he won his election years ago, he challenged the status quo inside the Democratic primary and then challenged it when he got to the outside. Donald Trump certainly did the same thing on the Republican side. What I'm not sure can happen, I don't know that a Democrat can actually challenge their existing base today and be successful. And other than Emmanuel, I'm not really seeing any real rush to go do that.
Well, I think the appeal of MAGAism is limited. And I think we've seen that here in Arizona. Pure MAGA candidates have consistently lost statewide elections to moderate Democrats or candidates acting as though they are moderate Democrats, even if they have a history of defying that. So here in Arizona, where Republicans have a fairly sharp registration advantage, and Democrats' percentage of registered voters has declined, mirroring what is occurring at the national level. We have two Democratic U.S. senators. We have a Democratic governor. We have a Democratic Secretary of State. And we have a Democratic Attorney General. And that's because Republicans fielded for those offices purebred MAGA candidates who cannot who a moderate Democrat can beat in terms of appealing to the hundreds of thousands of swing voters in Arizona who now decide elections. So in reality, MAGAism works for Trump. There's not much evidence that it works beyond Trump. And in Arizona, it's been a huge anchor on the electoral prospects of the Republican Party. They should have every one of those seats that I cited, and they have none of them.
So let's shift to the economy a little bit here, because I think this is an interesting issue as well. And there, what I want to do is I want to point out what I think is a dilemma for the Democratic Party. So, Bob, you a long time ago, you wrote a column about industrial policy in the United States. I'm going to ask you about that. But I didn't agree with you, by the way, but I'm increasingly beginning to agree with you on this. The idea with the industrial policy on the CHIPS Act, you pointed out the challenges and dangers that are going to come from having that type of policy as administrations want to begin to impose their will. Right, and Joe Biden, with the CHIP Act, went in and said, "Well, if we're going to give you this money, we want you to add daycare." Now Trump is saying, "Well, if we're going to give you this money, we want to give you money back to, or a percentage of interest back to the American people." All of which kind of seems reasonable, unless you actually have a president who actually starts getting involved with making policy decisions inside of those companies. And I say makes sense. I don't actually support it. I think it's a bad idea. But you can see the slippery slope that begins to happen with these funds being provided by the United States. And one president takes it in one direction, another president takes it in another. What I think, though, that we're seeing from, if you look at the challenge again to Donald Trump, is that on the economy, Democrats can't really even challenge him on the economy other than arguing that it's going bad or that the numbers aren't doing well. And the reason they can't do it is because there's a significant portion of the Democratic Party who actually buy into the socialist agenda, as we're seeing in New York today and in other places. What I see from candidates is oftentimes a unwillingness in the Democratic side to challenge anyone in their base. And so what that forces them to do is to go silent on this, in talking to the general public. They can't defend the Democratic brand because they know that the Democratic brand is slipping into the far left. And yet, even though they may not agree with the very far left, they don't want to challenge it because of the problems it would cause for them in their primary. They have the same problem that exists on the Trump side. It's just there's no candidate there doing it. It's an interest group that seems to be doing it. In any event, I covered a lot there, but I'd love to have your idea on this issue from an economic standpoint and talk about the industrial policy of what happened with the CHIPS Act and whether or not you think that there really is any potential alternative from an economic standpoint that exists in politics today.
Well, certainly there is not a political party any longer dedicated to a free market system. Both political parties now support industrial policy, and they just differ in the way in which they would administer it. And I certainly don't think that the Democrats have a coherent message to deliver on the economy. But I'm not sure they need one. If the midterms are a referendum on Trump's management of the economy, and I think it is largely shaping up as that, I don't think he obviously can't blame the 2026 economy on Joe Biden, which has been his preferred approach. It's always somebody else's fault. And I think irrespective of their actual impact on the economy, by going so hard and heavy on tariffs, Trump has made this his economy. And if it is not perceived as improving the living standards of average voters, I think it's going to be enough for Democrats just to be the other guy. And it won't be until 2028 that the Democrats hammer out a coherent position on the economy. And I agree with you, they are on thin ground in criticizing tariffs, criticizing the industrial policy that Trump is propounding. They can criticize sort of the cronyism that characterizes what Trump is doing. But that doesn't get at the heart of the issue. But again, I'm not sure that it's necessary for them to have a coherent message other than this is his economy. He said he was going to do a good job. He hasn't. It's time to provide a check on him. I think that's potentially a winning message in 2026. And I'm not sure that the Democrats are capable of coming up with a more comprehensive message in this period of time, given the disarray within their leadership and the fractionalization that's occurring among the very segments of the party.
So, Henry, I'm going to ask the same question to you, but before I do, just give me a second to kind of frame this. So I went online and I took a look at, in Arizona, our governor, our senators, our congressmen, looking for especially Democratic candidates to look at any type of long-form content that they've done, meaning podcasts or things where they had gone out to talk about the economy to see what their view was. I was shocked at how little they're doing any type of long-form content. I mean, the governor, it was literally, you were lucky if you could find 10 minutes of her talking about anything in any type of consistent format. And there was mostly talking about either why the Republicans had done something so terrible, or maybe a little bit about where they've been bipartisan, but no depth. There was just no depth at all. Now, my read of that is it's because they're pinned. All right. If they're going to go out and talk about the economy, they're going to have to talk about, well, how are you different? Right. And if the answer is, well, we're different because we're socialist, that's going to be a problem for them. And by the way, I don't think most Democrats are. That's actually not my read. I think that the progressive movement in the Democratic Party is socialist. They have a fundamental belief that socialism is the way to solve the problem. And I think that most mainstream Democrats do not want to take that on. But that leaves them pinned where they have an inability to provide any real counter to Trump. And that's where I come to a little bit of a disagreement with Bob, or at least I wonder whether or not he will be correct in looking at his crystal ball in the future. And that if I think the response by the Republicans is going to be they're just going to pin him on being socialist. They're going to say, you think our economy might be bad. You think our economic philosophy might be bad. Take a look at theirs. And they're going to struggle to define their difference. And that's going to be a problem for them.
Well, I think the Republicans will point to Mamdani in New York and to similar figures that have proposed more radical things like rent control, state-run supermarkets and things to basically say that the Democrats are more radical. But more importantly, as you and Bob both pointed out, that there's just been this embrace of something that I have long been calling economic nationalism. Some people are calling it state-led capitalism, but just much greater degree of state intervention in the economy than we are used to in the United States and in other Western countries. This has really sprung up since 2016 and not been rolled back under Joe Biden. Joe Biden did not roll back the tariffs that Trump had put on China. Joe Biden continued the industrial policy, especially the subsidies for chips. And in fact, Biden turbocharged this stuff with the Inflation Reduction Act and the green policies that were steering huge amounts of investment towards renewable energies and related things. So there seems to be a bipartisan commitment to these huge state interventions in the economy. Now, my observation would simply be that those things have not yet become costly enough that they're causing real pain. The United States economy is in relatively good shape. We're far removed from the sort of problems that they have in Britain right now, that they have in continental Europe, let alone in somewhere like Argentina, where Javier Milei was elected to slash government spending and government regulation. We are a long way removed from that. And so until Americans start to feel the pinch in a very real way around cost of living, around sluggish growth and employment, we're going to continue to see this bipartisan commitment for very, very different reasons, right? You're seeing it on the part of Trump because he views this nationalist coalition as wanting protectionism and to some degree industrial policy that's supposed to recreate manufacturing jobs. And then on the left, this is all part of a very long tradition of opposing capitalism, trying to impose more regulation on the economy, try and have the state control more of the economy to control outcomes. So both parties are on board with this at the moment. What's going to have to happen is things are going to have to go wrong. The economy is going to have to do much worse than it is right now before we start to turn back to some more sane and rational economic policies at some point in the future. I hope I live to see it, guys. I hope I live to see it.
Yeah, and by the way, my theory to the Democrats would be this. Right about the time it goes bad, let's just say it's time for the re-election of for president, it's not going to be Trump. The Republicans actually can be the ones that end up taking back the message of talking about how to implement free enterprise, and Democrats are going to be in a position where they're stuck on it.
Well, I think that's an interesting question, though, isn't it, Paul? Because how much credibility are Republicans going to have on this if Trump has just spent 4 to 12 years imposing tariffs, picking winners, taking stakes in Intel, demanding that NVIDIA pay a share of their profits to the federal government? I mean, how much credibility are Republicans going to have after going along with all of this? I think it will be up for grabs at some point in the future who is the real free enterprise pro-growth party.
I don't think there is a free enterprise pro-growth party left. It used to be that small government conservatives saw the Republican Party not necessarily as a reflection of their views in totality, but as the political vehicle through which they could try to advance their ideas. I don't think that can any longer be said to be true of the Republican Party. and the candidates which are being offered up by the Republican Party through the primary system are MAGA devotees. One of the interesting political questions is what do small government conservatives do in the future? They're a necessary element of a successful successful Republican victory coalition. But right now, there's no reason to look at the Republican Party and believe that it's any longer a vehicle through which small government conservative ideas, including preference for free enterprise and open investment markets for government-directed investment. That is a political quandary that will have an effect as we move forward. And I think it's going to become increasingly intense as Trump continues down this line of treating the government with respect to the private business as a commercial enterprise, not just a regulator and a taxer, which is what small business or small government conservatives believe is the proper role of government with respect to the economy. That's gone. That's not what the Republican Party stands for anymore.
All right. So, Henry, I want to turn just for a moment to talking about what aspirational message the Democratic Party can give. I don't see a lot of aspirational message in terms of what they have. I see them, at least up until now, only being able to talk about why they're not Donald Trump and why they're better, why they're not as bad as the where the Republican Party is today. One of the guys who wrote a book, we've talked about it on this podcast before, was Ezra Klein, who wrote the book called Abundance. And in this book, he talks about the importance of being able to build things. But what is fascinating to me is you spoke about the Build Back Better plan, and there was also the Inflation Reduction Act. Some of the statistics that have come out haven't been accurate. Like one of them was that after spending $7.5 billion, they'd only built like a dozen stations for electric vehicles. But the reality is that they built about 300, but that's still a ridiculously low amount. They talked about building fiber optic networks in the rural areas, and they spent billions of dollars to do it. And literally, they got less than 5% deployed. The point that I think Klein is making is that there's some advantage from his view in terms of what Donald Trump has the ability to do, and that is to go out and get things done. And he sees the Democratic Party through its rules, regulations, bureaucracy as being even in its own way, and that that if they want to build out battery centers and if they want to build out EVs as well as renewable energy sources, building affordable homes, that literally they've created this regulatory state that's so difficult that it's difficult for them to even do it. And on the other side, Trump really doesn't want to do it, so he's fine with those regulations and those places staying in place. He has no problem with them not being able to accomplish their goal. Is Ezra Klein's message a message that maybe they could grasp onto that would give them more of an economic message that might be more positive?
No. It's an elitist message that resonates with highly educated urban liberals who think about these things. The Democrats need to get back to appealing to regular, everyday, low to middle income Americans. And those people are not that interested in esoteric policy debates about zoning and planning restrictions. They're interested in cost of living, the affordability of housing, in healthcare, social security, minimum wages. That's what defines those people's lived existence. And I think the Democrats still have a lot of credibility on these issues because they created the New Deal. They created the social safety net in this country. They need to get back to appealing to people on these basic economic, material issues. They need to pivot away from identity politics, as we've discussed. And sure, maybe at the local level, there could be some Democratic politicians that embrace this deregulation agenda, especially in municipalities and in the states. But it's not going to be a big winner for them as an issue around which to organize the party. That the issue of deregulation and what Klein calls abundance it's an elite level debate that is not of interest to everyday working Americans. Wait a minute, Paul. Why don't you tell me? Why don't you tell me? What do you think they should do? What do you think is the message that the Democrats could move to on the national level that would really resonate and cut through?
Oh, I think that the Democrats have such a fundamental structural problem. They have an inability to move. If I were giving them advice, here's what it would be. We're forming this third party. If I were them, I would do everything I could to bring every independent back into the Democratic Party. I'd be supporting reforms, efforts to liberalize the system through open primaries and other means so that those independents can begin to have a voice. Because if they have a voice, it would change what's going on inside their primary. And if it changed what's going on inside their primary, they'd end up getting candidates who ended up not being socialists. They'd end up getting candidates that they would have a chance of being able to have a pro-growth agenda. I think the only way to counter Donald Trump is on the economic issues. You have to go to the right of him because he's gone to the left. He's squeezed out the Democratic Party on the far left side. You have to go to the right of him to be able to win. That says to me, the only way to do it is through a third party. That is the only way to create a counter to him and the current Republican MAGA base, which tends to look at issues, again, from a very, in my opinion, socialist left standpoint, certainly a higher government intervention standpoint. But if I were the Democrats, the way I would fix that is find a way to get independents back involved in the party. The people who are leaving their party in droves, find a way to get them back in.
Is there one specific institutional barrier? Is it like quotas for who gets to go to the convention? Is there one specific institutional barrier that you think is stopping the Democrats from being able to pivot in the way that Trump could kind of force the Republican Party to pivot?
So having a presidential candidate that was magnetic, that could attract people, and that pulled them in that direction would certainly be helpful. I don't think that's going to happen because if you look at the numbers in the Democratic primary, they're so lopsided. Like if I were to give you advice on how to run as a Democrat, here's what I would tell you. Start by this. Hate profit. Hate it. Just put that right at the top of the list. All capitalists and business people are greedy. That's your next one, right? Your third one is that the only way to fix these problems is to come up with a big government program and to get around the private sector, right? And then after that, it would be now make certain that in the shrinking economy, we know that it's becoming more difficult. Let's make certain that the minority group ends up getting more than the share that they have today. They're creating a fight over a diminishing pie. You can't win in that. That is just a bad place for them to be. And the only way I know to overcome it for them, you have to change the structure. You have to change the structure where you're getting those independents back into their party. And they're doing the opposite.
Really?
They're doing everything they can to the current governor, Katie Hobbs. She went out and raised $3 million to try to defeat us in the open primary by filing a lawsuit against us. I can tell you why she did that. She wants to run against a MAGA candidate. That's how she sees herself winning. Here's my answer. That's foolish. You should be doing everything you can to bring them back in. That is the only way the Democratic Party can really counter this existing threat. And short of that, I think the way that you counter the threat is you create a third party that doesn't give them a choice. If they won't go along with any type of reform that brings independents back in, create a structure that forces them that have to address it. And I can tell you what's going to happen when you do, and we're doing it. They're going to scream about the fact that you're going to help the Trump group. The answer is, we're not helping them. You help them. All right. We didn't have a third-party candidate run for president to ensure that Kamala would have a better chance of winning. Guess what? She didn't win anyway. Bob, I'm going to turn to your column that you did this week, where you talked about the independents. And what I'd like from you is the advice that you gave us. You gave us some advice on the name. You gave us some advice on things we shouldn't do. Tell me what your column said and what you were trying to say to us.
Well, I certainly agree with the critique that the existing two-party system is not yielding the choices that we want in terms of the general election. There are, I think, very severe problems on the right. A pragmatic, problem-solving center-right candidate can't win a Republican primary. I, in contrast a little bit to what you were saying, don't think the problem is as serious on the left. Certainly in Arizona, what I would describe as center-left candidates have successfully won primaries or had the primary open to them to maximize the chances of defeating a MAGA candidate in the general election. But it's slipping. The momentum on the left is with the progressives, and I think it will be increasingly difficult for pragmatic problem-solving center-left candidates to survive a Democratic primary. I believe, and I applaud you for your efforts to create an open primary system. I think that is the best solution to that problem of providing an opportunity for pragmatic problem-solving candidates to get to the general election ballot. I applaud the intent with the Arizona No Labels party to be that vehicle. And I think since that vehicle doesn't exist, particularly on the center right, it's a useful step forward to make that vehicle available. And I applaud you in the effort of others who are trying to make that achievable. I will say that I think you have a daunting organizational and communication challenge in recruiting and seeing that those kind of candidates win the No Labels party primaries. As you know, it's a very low threshold to get on the No Labels party primary ballot. And it will be an attraction to unserious candidates and cranks. And I think the first fielding of candidates will be an important credibility test to attract the interest of that 1.5 million registered independents in Arizona, as opposed to just the 40,000 registered No Labels party supporters at present. So I hope that it does become what you hope it will be, which is a vehicle for a different kind of leader currently blocked out from the general election ballot as an opportunity to present a different choice to the Arizona electorate. But I think it's going to be as I say, a daunting organizational and communication task to recruit those kind of serious candidates and then see that they emerge as the general election nominees of the new party.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. I've already begun to make presentations to different groups trying to recruit candidates into the mix. And you're right. The everything you said is exactly accurate. I don't have the only thing I can tell you is we're going to go put an effort into trying to change it. And I always like Don Quixote and windmills, so it doesn't matter much to me. But but you also made a recommendation on a name. Why did you recommend? I think you recommended the Arizona Independent Party. Tell me what your thought was behind that.
Well, that was my initial thought. Was that name reflects both the kind of candidate you want to advance, someone that's not beholden to partisan affiliations and will exercise independent judgment and not be just a third flavor of the sort of excessive partisanship that we currently are afflicted with, and also signal to the 1.5 million registered independents in Arizona that this is the people who are, this is the party that's trying to provide the kind of leadership that you want. As you know, there's been a claim made that you can't legally change the name of the party. I find that a dubious claim. As you have pointed out, it's a private organization, and I got to believe that you can internally go through whatever the decision-making process that your bylaws or incorporation provides to change the party, and that should be accepted by the state of Arizona, since there's no law against changing the name of a party. But I'm not sure that that is worth the legal battle that might ensue when compared to devoting your energy to the recruitment and the election of the kind of candidates that you want to field. And the current name, as I reflected upon it, isn't that bad. I mean, no labels does indicate a nonpartisan, non-ideological, pragmatic problem-solving approach. So I don't think that the current name is all that bad in terms of identifying what this effort is about, which isn't to be a third flavor of partisanship. It's to be a vehicle for pragmatic problem solvers of a whole range of ideological perspectives, but who aren't going to be beholden to partisan considerations over what's good government. I think the existing name does a decent job of conveying that.
And the last piece of advice you gave us was to not succumb to the temptation to not run candidates, to withhold support or candidates in different elections to make certain that you wouldn't do any harm to one party or the other. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, and I fully anticipate you're going to get the same kind of pressure, intense pressure, particularly from the Democratic Party, and candidates that you are known to be recruiting will get the similar pressure that the No Labels movement got at the national level when they were considering fielding a presidential and vice presidential candidate. And that is that you make it more likely that a MAGA candidate can succeed. I think also if you're fielding center-right pragmatic problem-solving candidates, there's an argument to be made that you provide a place for the disaffected Republicans or non-MAGA Republicans who can't stomach the Democratic candidate to go to. So I don't think you can necessarily sort that out independent of who the candidate might be. But any kind of tactical consideration like that is propping up and propagating the two-party binary system that's not serving us well. If you flinch because of the impact you're going to have on that binary choice, you're never going to get around to getting something that's better than what that binary choice is providing. So that would be my view, is that you just ignore those tactical considerations, recruit quality candidates, and let the chips fall where they may. If the candidate of your party is not going to be successful in winning. Because if you don't make that challenge, if you flinch from that challenge because of what effect it might have between the two party candidates, you'll never get to the point of actually providing a alternative, which there's every indication that the body politic in Arizona would prefer to the choices that they're currently being presented.
I'm just really interested to see who your candidates are going to be, Paul. Is this all top secret?
Well, actually, you don't know this, but this podcast was actually a recruiting effort of the two of you. I've got a plan for both of you to be able to run for an office inside.
There are these jokes about being the dog catcher, the election for dog catcher. And, I could be swayed. Paul.
Now, look, you guys would fit the mold perfectly of what I want, right? Both center right. Both of you are representing a group of ideas that seem to have been cast out by both parties. You're both bright and smart. I'll give Henry the age issue over both of us, Bob. We definitely, the existing Democratic Party, if you look at the age issue, it's highly problematic.
But I have to be able to move faster if I'm going to catch the dogs. Paul, I've got to be able to run faster if I'm going to catch the dogs. So that makes sense. So what you're telling me, Paul, is it's still top secret. There's no announcements about potential candidates yet.
Oh, it's not top secret. I'll give you what the secret is. We don't have people to announce yet.
Okay.
But I can tell you that I'm going out to entrepreneurs organization. I'm going out to chambers. I'm going out to leadership groups, people who have been trying to train leaders inside the system. By the way, one of the groups that I found to be really fascinating was the Flynn Brown Fellows. The Flynn Brown Fellows over the years have trained Democrats and Republicans both to, what the main issues were inside of the political system, and then tried to get them to run for office. And I don't know what their success level was, but I know that I helped out a number of them, trying to show them what it would take to win in a Democratic primary or Republican primary. And it was almost universal when they got done understanding what it was going to take, how far right they'd have to go on the Republican Party or how far left they'd have to go on they just weren't willing to do it. They actually were willing to take the personal insults and the challenges that come with people attacking you way over the idea that to win, they had to go appeal to these extreme edges of both sides. I think there's a real audience of people who are smart, bright, on the left, on the right, but who want to solve the problems and who want to talk about issues and who want to talk about how do we fix our educational problems, the budget deficits, lower interest rates, fix the housing problem. They spent a lot of time doing research and putting efforts into thinking about those ideas that actually I think we can convince. We'll see, but today the only secret is that I want to announce you two just as quick as I can for being a candidate for office. But
maybe me and Bob could go in the primary for dog catcher. Bob and I could run against each other in the primary.
So I need a constable with a gun.
We can make a documentary about it. It's going to be great.
Yeah, first guy to get elected has to be a constable with a gun.
I make Sherman look indifferent and undecided as to whether he's going to run.
What I can tell you is that we're putting a lot of work into it. I've had calls from lots of people who would like to be candidates. I would say 2/3 of them don't know how to be. They don't know how to actually run a race. So it's something that we're going to have to spend time doing, putting together not only candidate recruitment, but candidate training. I can tell you I'm unafraid of having anybody run that wants to run. I don't see myself as engaging and trying to stop people from participating. I think that's a mistake. I look at this as a long-term effort, not a short-term. I don't know what success we're going to have in 2026, but I can tell you I'm planning on doing 2026, 2028, and 2030. And my logic to that is if you do it for 2 or 3 years, people start to recognize that you're going to be there. And part of the success comes from them recognizing that you're going to be there and that they're going to have to go back and appeal to that group of voters that are being left out of the system today. I think if we continue to run and we don't have a Democratic Party or Republican Party that starts addressing these issues, I think it'll become much more serious. The Independent Party in Oregon, they've actually gotten people elected. But it's the same reason. It's because both the left and the right there have begun to appeal to a set of issues, leaving out a whole set of ideological views or philosophical views that just aren't being addressed by the normal body politic. We talked about this today. I think if you're going to run against Trump today on the economic issues, if you try to run against him from the left, the only place you have to go is socialism. You have to run against him from the right on these issues. And I don't think the Democratic Party can do it other than pointing out its failure. And that means that they believe that it's going to fail. I don't know what failure looks like. I don't know if failure means a depression, a recession, or just that we became less efficient, that we didn't grow as well as we thought we were going to, that our deficit continued to grow, that our interest rates didn't go down because we didn't see it, that we saw a stalling of the economy, an economy that could be doing better. We have less innovation, less people creating. How you define that success is important. Here's what I am sure of. An open economy where you have more people participating, where you have a freer market, where you have more free trade, where you have a balanced budget is going to lower interest rates, and it's going to provide for a better economy with more jobs and higher innovation. I am absolutely positive of that. But better as opposed to what, right? Might be better as opposed to 1% growth or 3% growth. My only point is that you're not going to beat him by going to the left. And that is what I think the Democratic Party is going to get stuck in and having to address.
I agree that the Democratic Party seems to want to try and go to the further to the left to beat Trump, but there's still a couple of years before the presidential election yet.
The Democratic Party badly needs a pro-growth revival, which it had going back to the 1980s. If it can do that, then I think it can, if it adopts the attitude that we need to grow a bigger pie in order to do the redistribution that we want, I think they have a chance to regain some momentum on the economy. I don't foresee that happening. And so my suspicion is that your view that this kind of an economic argument won't be coming from the Democratic Party.
So, Bob, I agree with you, and here's what I would say. The last pro-growth Democrat was definitely Bill Clinton. I mean, he had a very pro-growth agenda. He owned Silicon Valley at the time. He balanced the budget. They lowered interest rates. If you go back and you listen to his speeches, he was exceptional at talking about the economy. And for those people who want to compare him to Obama, here's what I would tell you. When Obama was running for re-election, he knew he was in trouble. And he used Bill Clinton and a speech on the economy to try and help frame why his economic message should work. Point I'm giving is this: unless they go back to that, unless they're able to go back to some type of pro-growth agenda, they're in big trouble. And if they're in big trouble, it means that this revenge agenda, it means that what we're seeing in terms of our international policy, most of the things that you're seeing with the Trump administration, if the public is left with having to choose between Trump and the thoughts of nationalism from a Republican standpoint, they're going to pick that over a democratic socialism almost any day of the week. And unless the Democratic Party can begin to frame what their economic theory is, one that's relative and that makes sense, that's going to be the place that the public pegs them as seeing these economic issues from. Gentlemen, thanks a lot. I appreciate you being here today, and I will see you guys next week. By the way, I've got my banners to put up. Bob Robb for Senate. Well, I guess we don't have a Senate race this year. Bob Robb for Congress, and Henry, you're going to have to do better than dog catcher. I'm thinking like, maybe we get you to run for governor or one of the other seats. So
I love dogs. I love dogs.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much today.
Thanks, guys.
And we stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of unknown opportunities and peril. It holds out the promise of more sacrifice instead of more security. The new frontier is here.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.